It's the intel about the next generation of Bulldogs. This is Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger.
Let's go, I'm a Bulldog.
Hello, DawgNation, and welcome into Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger. I'm Kaylee Mansell with DawgNation recruiting insider Jeff Sentell. You may notice that we're in different locations today. The weather's been chaotic, but Hedges stays the same.
Snow day, Kaylee, is that what we're going to call it? Sort of like, you know, the grown-ups and the adults, we have to go play. Remember Zoom? Remember those days? Remember that? We're bringing it back Before the Hedges style. Wednesday night live. Kaylee, we get to see a little bit of your brand new apartment. I'm told those are fairy lights back there. Might be old school Hedges here, guys. You might hear a dog barking in the background. We just don't know. There's so many surprises in store for our show today.
I know. What would you guys do without me if I didn't tell you what these lights behind me were called? I guess you learn something new every day, and we hope that you're going to learn something new here today on Before the Hedges. This is what we've got going on today's show. Of course, last weekend was Junior Day, and one prime target from Georgia, Tyler Atkinson, had a lot to say about the Dogs after his Junior Day visit. So we'll discuss that. Then we'll do an entire Junior Day recap. Who were those breakout stars that you need to know about? Then we'll continue our Dawg DNA with what is it that the tight ends coach Todd Hartley looks for when he's out there recruiting the best tight ends in the country. And then we're going to have the important conversation that's on everyone's mind right now. Do you have to have $20 million to build a championship roster? Jeff's got a great take on it, so we'll get to that later. But for now, we're going to start with this. Tyler Atkinson is somebody that we've been talking about for, it feels like months now. And he was that big visitor that you kept dropping Easter eggs in last week's show to say that he was going to be there. And this is a guy I imagine that when he's going to Junior Day, every coach is talking to him. Everybody wants to say something to Tyler Atkinson.
Everybody does, even the fans inside Stegman Coliseum. And, yeah, you know, Kaylee, this is just going to be what it is. I think Tyler is going to be the alpha priority, 1A, 1B for this class. It's really Atkinson and Jared Curtis. Last week, big Junior Day. We'll get into kind of the breakdown of Junior Day in a little bit, one of our other segments. But you got about 25 guys there. There was only one 5-star. That was Tyler Atkinson out of Grayson. What can we say about him? I think the quickest thing we can say about him is that I feel, the DawgNation team here, we feel that Tyler's the best linebacker prospect in the state of Georgia since the great Roquan Smith. That's saying a mouthful. That's saying a whole lot. But the young man has done nothing but back it up over the last 3 seasons of high school football. And big boy GHSA, highest classification football. Great relationship there with his family. And, you know, Kaylee, this guy was offered by Georgia, I believe it was March of 2022. And every time he's been to Georgia, I feel like for at least the last 16, 18, maybe even 2 years, it should feel like an official visit. He should feel like a priority. He took one to Georgia for Junior Day this past weekend. And the Dogs really, really did some good things. We're going to chop it up. We wrote a story about that on Sunday. You know, sometimes, Kaylee, I feel for these young men because when you're a player like Atkinson, you take a visit to Georgia, and this was just an unofficial. But I bet he got interview requests from probably 10, 15 different media members, regional, nationwide, everything else like that. And it's different, but Tyler Atkinson is a special player.
Well, based on his visit, he did have some things to say about the Dogs and Georgia after. We're going to show it to you in 3 different parts here. Let's start with this first one. At the visit, he said, I have learned something new every visit. A lot of new things I learned yesterday are really just my personal takeaways. UGA has always made me feel like a top priority, but they have took it up a few levels. That's exactly what you want to hear a recruit, especially one with the stature of Tyler Atkinson, say, is that every single time I leave Georgia, I learn a new thing, because that's going to be huge in the back of his mind as he goes through the next year of this recruitment process.
Kelly, think about this, man. I mean, guys, think about this. This is like I bet he's visited Georgia 15 times that the world knows about, maybe another 5 or 6 that have all been kind of secret visits. And for them to be saying that, that's kind of like, I go back to any sort of relationship. When every date is a great date and it keeps getting better and better, then you might know that you have the one. So really, January visits, Kaylee, they're kind of overrated because all you're going to do is you're going to watch a basketball game. You can't try on the gear anymore. You're going to have some meals with the coaches. You're going to watch some film. You're going to sit around. You're going to hang out, and you're going to vibe with other guys that you think you might play with. And really, what January visits are all about is they're slinging hope, if you know what I mean. And what you want out of every visit is for Tyler Atkinson to start saying things like, I've never seen, I learned something new, or I've never seen quite like that aspect of Georgia. And I really asked him, I said, Kaylee, what, in your opinion, what does that look like when you say Georgia takes it up a few levels? And for him, it was like the one-on-ones with Kirby Smart. It was like the interactions with family. It was also like learning about really personal things that stand out. And that was something that it already feels like what did he say? Sometimes, Kaylee, he says a lot when he says a very simple sentence. He said, like, they really want me bad. And when you can get that sort of indicator from Georgia, when Miami, Oregon, Ohio State, Tennessee, Auburn, the who's who of college football, Texas, throw them in there. They all want you. And you can really feel that love from your home state school. That's a big deal.
If there's anything I feel like I've learned about Tyler Atkinson and hearing your interviews with him, it's how important his family is to him. They seem very close-knit, and families are a really big part of visits. And sometimes in the past, it's been make or break and come down to what the family thinks. So I was really excited when I got to see that Tyler Atkinson said this about his family in regards to the visit as well. Seeing Kirby and my pops really vibing during the game was dope. I like how they made sure my mom was comfortable and stuff. That was great to me. It was really good because if you are making the family feel comfortable, you're making them feel like a priority. That's conversations that you're having at the dinner table at the end of the night with your mamas. Oh, I really like the school. Hey, I like them too. If you are number one in mama's heart, there's a good chance it's going to bump it up in your heart a little bit too.
Yeah, what is the phrase? Wise men, for years, philosopher has stated, if she's not happy, if mama's not happy, no one's happy. And then, like, it was really cool, Kaylee, because they were sitting there watching the Georgia basketball game. It was Victor Atkinson, it was Kirby, it was Tyler, it was his mother, Laura Atkinson. And, I asked Tyler, I said, let me ask you a different question, man, because everybody's going to ask what was cool, favorite part. I said, what's it like watching a basketball game with Kirby Smart? Is he like that guy that's a stickler for effort and defense and he wants steals? Because that's what we would all think. That's what we all think. Kirby, the defensive guy. But then I was like, well, maybe he likes to see guys jack threes and he likes to see guys, athleticism and sky for dunks. And Tyler just said, he said, man, that guy is a competitor. He likes watching guys compete. He loves seeing that effort. I thought that was pretty cool when he can say something about me and I watch Kirby and my pops kind of vibing. That's the little things that Tyler Atkinson is looking for. Because I've been told, Kaylee, everybody's going to sit there and say, it might cost a lot. Might cost $1 million, $1.5 million a year, maybe even more than that. But I've continued to be told this by Tyler Atkinson and his camp is that development and fit, those relationships are going to outweigh those short-term dollars.
You mentioned earlier that Tyler Atkinson is perhaps the biggest linebacker recruit since Roquan Smith. And it's funny that you say that because that is a name that did get brought up during his visit. In fact, we'll show you this here. They mentioned players like Roquan Smith, Jalen Walker, Nolan Smith, Jacoby Dean, and Quay Walker. They're comparing him and his skills and the type of player he is to some of the all-time Georgia greats. I mean, that's got to be music to your ears if they're already putting you in the category with the rest of them. And as I've said to you earlier before we tape this, it's like those are all guys in recent years that have already had so much success at the NFL level. And they were already so talented when they came into Georgia and then got developed even further, which has now proven them to be so successful in the NFL. So if I'm Tyler Atkinson, I'm looking at two things here. Wow, they think really highly of me. And wow, like if this is the ceiling for where I can get to, this is a good fit for me.
Yeah, Kaylee, it's kind of like this. Like if you're sitting there trying to get the NFL Super Bowl halftime gig And you can sit there and go, hey, just look at the Billboard Hot 100. I have 12 of them. Or look at the last Grammys. I have 5. I haven't sold as many seats as that Taylor Swift lady, maybe. But like for what it is when you're a linebacker and you can sit there and Georgia can sit there and go, hey, man, we're comparing you to these guys. And you just look at that and those names again. Those are 5 of the greatest linebackers in Georgia history. The benefit there for Georgia is you don't have to go look at some old Zapruder film or some old grainy VHS to figure it out. These are all guys that have been playing, performing, developing on the Georgia stage just in the last 3 or 4 years. And, let's be honest, last 3 or 4 years, Kaylee, most of these recruits, they don't know who Adrian Peterson is. They don't know who Terrell Davis is, Garrison Hurst is. So, like, when you can sit there and talk about guys they know that they have seen on their way to the NFL or in the NFL, that just means a great deal.
I think that you make an excellent point, but I do have to say it makes me a little bit sick to my stomach that kids these days may not know who Adrian Peterson is. That makes me start to feel older.
True.
But, you're someone that's covered Tyler Atkinson. You've seen his relationship with Georgia grow. Really, how big of a leap was this for him and the University of Georgia?
I think it's a constant battle. And what Georgia is trying to do is stay 5 to 10 yards ahead of everyone. They want to make a surge with Tyler. So then when he goes and visits other schools, when they catch up a little bit, maybe they don't ever fully catch Georgia. And I'll go back to what we just said. Kaylee, when he sits in a room with maybe Miami or Alabama or Ohio State, Tennessee, Auburn, and they start talking about development, there's nothing they can do to counteract Quay Walker, Nolan Smith, Nakobe Dean, Roquan Smith, and Jalen Walker. Those are 5 of the best linebackers in the last 6 years in the SEC, and they've all came from Georgia. And very few of these schools, if any, have produced a player like that, just one in the last 5 years, much less 5 or 6 like Georgia has. You see the news about Jalen Walker. Some of the earliest projections now for those mock drafts have him going inside the top 10, Kaylee. And when Georgia looks at Tyler Atkinson, they see he can be an off-ball linebacker or he can be an on-ball linebacker. He can rush the passer off the edge. He's already got 79 TFLs, 31 career sacks. He's got 475 career tackles. So he shows he can play inside the box as well, like Nakobe. Georgia really sees him as a hybrid that can do a lot of things.
Well, Tyler Atkinson wasn't the only junior day standout. In just a minute, we're going to show you 6 more. But first, we want to remind you that here on Before the Hedges, we are brought to you by Kroger. And Jeff said at the top of the show that I am in my new apartment. And one of the things I was most excited for is that I could take a rock, go out on my patio, throw it, and hit Kroger. Like, I'm sitting here looking at my kitchen and all the things that I had to go buy from Kroger literally day one. It's been my lifesaver. But even if you don't have one right next to your house, you should try out Kroger Boost right now. They're doing it 30 days for free. Save up to $1,000 per year, plus 2 times the fuel points and grocery delivery. And you can do that by signing up at KrogerBoost.com. And again, I just want to shout out Kroger because it has been my lifesaver these last couple of days, because you move and you have these things where you're like, you don't realize that you need it until you don't have it. And I'm like, okay, good. I've probably made 4 Kroger trips in the last 3 days. So Kroger, seriously, thank you. And again, don't forget to check out KrogerBoost.com to sign up today. So we spoke on Tyler Atkinson, but now we're going to do a full junior day review. We've got 6 names to show you. We'll go ahead and show you the first names on the screen. We've got 4-star running back Carson All-Day Baker. I've heard Jeff talk about him so much over the last 48 hours. I'm starting to only remember these players by their nicknames and not their actual names. Then you've got the 4-star wide receiver Davion Brown out of Richmond, Virginia, and the 4-star edge Kamari Brooks out of Bogart, Georgia.
Kaylee, there's a lot to like here. First of all, I'm applauding you for your nickname game, because Carson is All-Day Baker. He got that nickname because he's 6'2.5". He's 200 plus pounds. He runs a 10.5. And when you ask him, who does he play like? Carson says, my guy is Adrian Peterson. So Kaylee, I know you're going to like Carson Baker.
Thank God.
Because there's at least one guy that still knows who All-Day is right there. And really, Georgia made a pretty big leap there with Carson Baker. They didn't even offer him, Kaylee, until Milton in the state title game when he popped up 3 touchdowns against Milton. You know, Georgia likes to see those big stage players. They like to see you do it against other teams that are really good. And when he was already kind of a middling 4-star, number 25 running back in the country, but when you do that and then you have 15 touchdowns in a season, 1,200 yards, 8.8 yards per carry, and then you do it against a team like the two-time defending champion Milton Eagles, that catches some eyes. It really caught Georgia's eyes. They offered. And Kaylee, let's be very real here. He grew up pretty much liking Georgia a lot. This was a Georgia family. He's got a lot of dogs in his family. Got some Alabama fans, I think, and some other schools like that. But this is an impactful visit. He feels like Georgia is making him a priority. And my opinion on Carson Baker is I think Carson is going to be one of those guys in state where we're going to have a little bitty mini game. We talk about Easter eggs. Wait till the top targets pop up, and we show you this week's top targets. I'm going to tell you how much I think the top targets are going to cost in NIL, just a ballpark approximation. So if Georgia can, everybody would say Georgia needs to sign that 5-star running back and that 5-star running back. Going to be very, very hard to do. So when you've got a guy in state that checks all the boxes, that you're already recruiting like a priority and can still play like those dudes, he just isn't as well known or as well marketed. I think that's a win for Georgia in the 2026 class.
No, there is an out-of-state kid, and we're talking about nicknames. I want to say that Davion is Fat Rat. Did I
Fat Rat.
Okay, you're gonna have some explaining to do on that.
Yeah, I love that. That was my first question when I talked to Davion this week. He's out of Richmond, Virginia, and Georgia basically Georgia offered him, I want to say on a Saturday or a Sunday. That next week, he was in Athens for a visit. He got to sit courtside next to Kirby Smart. So if you got that courtside Georgia-Auburn basketball time, then you knew you were a priority. He was kind of floored because he's like, hey, man, this is Georgia here. And here's what was interesting, because that was my first question. His name is Fat Rat, and this is a 6'4", 195-pound gazelle of a receiver, right? And he's like, man, I got that when I was very little. I was chunky. I was a little big bone when I grew up, when he was like more of that trending to be an offensive lineman rather than a game breaker wide receiver. So he got that nickname Fat Rat, and everybody in his circle has called him that ever since. But that was a guy, you want to talk about a fast and furious recruitment. I think Georgia has went from 0 to 75 in Davion Brown's recruitment, probably in a span of about 10 days.
All right, so let's move on to another in-state kid, and that's going to be the edge, Kamari Brooks. North Oconee also was just a part of the state championship, so Georgia got to watch them there, and then they got up close and personal with him at junior day.
Yeah, it's one of those things. You hear Alabama, you hear Auburn, you hear Tennessee a lot with Kamari. Georgia, they turned up the volume. Another example here of you play your best game of your career on the biggest stage, and that was for Kamari Brooks at the GHSA state championships against Marist. He was the player of the game. He was a dominator. He caught a touchdown pass. He had a lot of TFLs. He had a lot of havoc plays. And this is a little different kind of edge type that Georgia's looking at. This guy is a pretty decent little high school tight end. Now, he's not going to drift into Todd Hartley's room, but when you see that sort of skill set out of a guy that's going to play the edge potentially for a lot of teams in the SEC, that means something. And I think Georgia and Kamari, ever since Georgia kind of awakened to how good he actually was when he kind of, took over that state title game against Marist, I think Georgia's been in hot pursuit. And I think Kamari's recognized that.
So we've got 3 more standouts from junior day. The next one's going to be the 4-star cornerback Chauncey Kennon out of Sarasota, Florida. Then you've got the 4-star running back Jay Lamar out of Moultrie, and then the 4-star athlete Ryan Mosley out of Carrollton. In terms of Chauncey, what was it about him that stood out amongst the rest? Because cornerback is a tough position, especially in the eyes of Kirby Smart. So what was it about Chauncey that really caught their attention?
Well, Chauncey is rated by some services as the #1 corner in the country out of Sarasota, and he's got a lot of game. He's got like a top 5. Georgia is squarely in that mix, and this was another one of those visits. Kaylee, all of these guys that we're mentioning here, these visits, especially the junior day visit, they're supposed to plant seeds. And those seeds are going to be like, man, I can't wait to get back to Georgia. Or maybe Georgia's got some juice here that nobody else has. That way, when they go see the Dogs again, maybe in March, or maybe when they come see those kids during spring practice, or when they get to Georgia for spring practice to watch the Dogs get after it, I think that matters to these kids. Like every time they visit, and every time Georgia comes around, they're like, oh man, those dogs are after me, and I really want to be there too. And I think with Kenna, that's another example because it's South Florida kid, Miami, Florida State, Florida. You got to be recruiting a kid really, really good to try to pull a guy out of there. And I think Georgia has really stepped up to the plate with Chauncey. And you've already seen some national analysts have already started thinking about pulling the trigger on a crystal ball or a future forecast or whatever a lot of folks call it for Chauncey Kennan in Georgia.
So someone in this class that I'm interested to see where things go is the 4-star running back, Jay Lamar, because in a crazy twist and turn of events, Georgia only ended up with one running back in the last class and Bo Walker. And so I'm imagining that they're going to go after the running backs heavy. It would be a good move to pull an in-state one, a South Georgia guy. So Jay Lamar is someone that I've got my eye on, so I know that Georgia has their eye on him too.
Yeah, he's a guy, Kaylee, that they're already calling him probably one of the best offensive players they've had at Colquitt County in quite some time. He's like 6'1". He's well over 200. He's really fast, got the tape for it, and he can catch the ball really well. And, Kaylee, he only had about 10 carries a game last year as kind of a tandem backfield. And now this next season, he's going to get a lot of juice, going to get a lot of carries. I know Sean Calhoun at Colquitt County will feature him a lot, and I'm expecting a very big season. And again, it's okay to chase those 5-star running backs, but at some point you got to look in terms of how you can structure your roster together the best way. And if you've got a kid down in Moultrie that has always loved Georgia, that really means something as well, that can kind of play just as well as those highly rated guys. But the fact that he's grown up in South Georgia, always kind of thought about being the dog. Jay Lamar has had Georgia as his top school, or right there as his top school, for a long time now, basically since they offered him, before they offered. So that's another one we're going to watch really closely.
Last one, it's going to be the 4-star athlete, Ryan Mosley, and wide receiver, safety. What would he play at Georgia? What are they pitching to him?
So there's a lot of stuff to talk about with Ryan. He's a Carrollton. He's a Terrence Edwards #TE wide receiver academy protege. But he's about 6'4". He's about 200 pounds. He wants to make his decision in July. Georgia is a school that is very high up on his list. They might even still be. He still feels comfortable talking about the dogs in his leader position. But here's where it gets interesting, because he has such a dynamic skill set. He's being recruited by both James Coley at Georgia to play wide receiver, but he's also being recruited by T-Rob to play safety. And what does that look like? That's a great question. Is this like the new Travis Hunter speech or the pitch you're going to give everybody? Well, that Georgia sees a future where Ryan Mosley is a receiver, bread and butter most of his time at Georgia. But then on third downs and nickel and dime packages specifically, they'll throw him out there at safety because they feel like he can do that at a very high level. Very intriguing pitch to hear from a team he's always loved, that you could do both sides of the ball in Athens. And he's very receptive to that pitch right now.
That's honestly really surprising to me.
Yeah.
That just shows how athletic he is, that Georgia's even willing to do that, because Georgia isn't necessarily, or has not been, a school in the past that's like, yeah, you can play both ways. So that speaks volumes about the kind of athlete he is, if they're even considering that as an option.
Probably it's a nod to the current era, Kaylee. If you're going to get a player that can play two spots, that might help your roster, that might help your payroll, that might help your depth chart. And really, it's also, I guess it's also like, listen, Kaylee, over the years, we've heard some gully washer whoppers of stories. Like, everybody remembers the future first-round pick, Terrion Arnold. He was told by Alabama that he could also play basketball and not just safety or cornerback for Georgia. He played exactly 0 minutes for Alabama's basketball team, but Nick Saban got him to the NFL, and he was a first-round pick. So sometimes those recruiting promises are kind of like tall tales, but sometimes in this day and age, you got to get clever, you got to get creative, and when you're trying to figure out a way to have the best, 50, 60 guys on your roster, that's maybe a new way of looking at it.
All right, with that, we're going to check out Dawg DNA in just a minute. But first, it is cold out there and it's all fun and games for like 2 days. And then all of a sudden, I'm ready to be in the warm sun again. And if you're feeling that way too, go ahead and escape the cold, because now is a good time to score amazing deals on coastal accommodations in Daytona, 23 miles of Atlantic shoreline. And it's more than just relaxing on the beach, but you can also pursue outdoor activities like surfing, fishing, kayaking, and more. And the best part about it is travel is so easy. You can take flights into the Daytona Beach International Airport. I've actually been there before. It's a great airport, super easy to navigate, nothing like Hartsfield Jackson. So if you're tired of this cold, just like me, make sure to check them out at DaytonaBeach.com/hotels to find out the accommodations that you can get. And spring break's coming up too, so start thinking about that too. All right, with that, we are going to do another segment of Dawg DNA. Dawg DNA is something that Jeff and I introduced last week, where Jeff had the opportunity at the Sugar Bowl to talk to a lot of the Georgia assistant coaches and figure out what exactly is it that you look for. Last week we did James Coley and the wide receivers, but this week we're going to listen to one of Georgia's most infamous coaches. This is going to be Todd Hartley on what he looks for in tight ends.
What are the key words for your room that you're looking for?
Okay, size profile. All right, can they be big enough to play in the SEC? All right, physicality profile. Do they have an edge about them from a physicality, violence standpoint? Do they show something in high school that shows that they'll be willing to throw it around and put their body on the line in our conference day in and day out? Okay, all right. Then, as much as we do with our guys in the passing game in our offense, I would like to think that we're a somewhat tight end-centric offense. You've got to have the ability to run and catch and show that you can do something with the ball in your hands after the catch. You got to show that you have the ability to make plays one-on-one, contested catches, what we call competitive excellence. Do you have competitive excellence? Can you make the play one-on-one when your number is called? And then do you have the character, the gumption about you? Like, do you have that it factor that allows you to thrive in our culture? Not just our tight end room, but what Kirby has built at Georgia. Like, there's a certain type of profile that it attracts. Okay, do you fit that profile? And most of the kids, I would say, most all the kids that we have right now. I mean, I love our room. I love the kids we have in our room. I love the kids that are coming into our room. They fit all those criteria. And you know what? Sometimes it's hard to figure that out 100% during the recruiting process, but you try to do your best to hit as many markers as you can.
You watch the film. I guess you probably still rather have them in camp and work them in camp rather than the film. But what's the immediate trait that captures you? Is it toughness for your room, or what is it?
There has to be something that's to pop at you, right? Usually the first thing you look for, can you run and can you catch? If you can't run, you can't catch, then you can't play our offense. I mean, and that's probably the most easily identifiable trait off of high school tape is, can the guy run, can the guy catch, can he make plays with the balls in the air, right? And then once you find that, then it's like, all right, does he show some type of trait of physicality, toughness, violence, finish? Does he want to put his hands on people, or does he avoid contact? Does he not even want to be around it? If you can run and you can catch, we verify size, speed, profile, and then you show a little bit of toughness, and you're willing to be, a blocker and allow me to help you become a better blocker, then you're probably going to have success at Georgia tight end.
And just listening to every point that he made, there's no doubt in my mind now why Todd Hartley is the best tight ends coach in all of college football. The specifics of what he had to say, one of the things that stood out to me is when he said he's looking for tight ends that can play at the SEC level. One thing that in my mind separates Georgia from everyone else is sometimes SEC teams have a difficult time finding one SEC tight end, and Todd Hartley manages to pull in one, if not two, in every single class.
It was kind of funny. It was kind of like I have this thing that I think about when I hear somebody talking about that. I feel like they're at an expert level. Like, what's that common great book, The Genius Principle, The Expert Principle? You have to do something 10,000 times to become an expert or a genius at it. And I feel like I feel like I wish that was my golf swing, but I feel like what it is you've got when I listen to Todd Hartley talk about recruiting tight ends, it just sounds different. It sounds like I'm listening to Eric Clapton talking about guitar chords or something like that, or Tiger Woods talking about ball striking. But with that, I mean, it was so detailed, Kaylee. He started going on and on and on. And listen, Georgia has a whole staff of elite recruiters. When I asked them that same question, they had a great answer. They had a polished answer, but their answer was probably about 15 seconds, or it was just like one thing. But to listen to everything Hartley looks for, I wrote about this because I was like, DawgNation's got to read this. This is why the guy has all this juice. And it was simply because it was almost like I needed an intermission in the middle of it, or it lasted longer than a Kardashian relationship. That's why Todd Hartley is what he is. You hear about him talk about tight ends like he's talking about his children or his favorite baseball cards growing up, whatever it is. I mean, that guy is invested in the tight ends for the University of Georgia. And you have to love what he said there about, I want guys, physicality, violence, put their hands on somebody. That's a Georgia tight end. And the definition and why it's so great takes him about 47 seconds to rattle it off.
In being a good coach, there's a balance. You have to have the balance of not only being a good coach that can develop young men into good players and good people, but also the recruiting aspect of it. And from what we've heard, what we're able to gather, Todd Hartley is a good recruiter. And in listening to all the things that he had to say and the way he went about it, like, I think you put it perfectly. It's like listening to a really good musician talk about music. It just sounds different. And so I can see why everyone says he's such a great recruiter, because it's not just one thing. He was so specific, didn't have to take any time to think about it. So even just listening to that, I was like, I'll come play tight end at the University of Georgia. It's fine. Not that his all the things that he said, maybe I'm not that, but it made me want to go play for him. And I can see why everybody in this room loves him and stays in the room.
He had a good point, Kaylee. I was talking about, I was like, man, and this will be like a story that'll be on DawgNation.com soon, but it's like, I was like, dude, is your job now more of a recruiter? Are you more of a recruiter / retainer where you have to re-recruit your entire room back? And he's like, man, I get it. It's difficult. It's different. But he said something like, you got to let them know where they stand. You got to let them know why they're not playing and what they have to work on and where they've got to get better. And then when they get better, you show them that that's what you really meant. And for him, he says it's all about relationships. You get to know these families for 2, sometimes 3 years in your recruiting. That's why Kirby Smart stresses early evaluation with all of his coaches for all their rooms. The sooner you evaluate that's a Georgia guy, the sooner you can start building that relationship with their inner circle, with their decision makers. So then when it's time for them to make their decision, they realize, because you've been there for so long, that you're with them, you're part of that circle, you have their best interests of their career at heart, and you can trust them in this day and age of dollar signs.
One of the quotes that stood out to me was when he was talking about, can they finish? Do they want to put their hands on people, or do they avoid contact? Do they want to be around it? Because you're looking for tight ends who could obviously catch the ball, but Georgia tight ends are violent players by nature in the past. And so that said to me, that's the kind of guy I'm seeking out, is somebody who craves that contact and doesn't try and avoid it.
Kaylee, I like how he handles it, because he has a position that could sell itself. Listen, he can just sit there and say, hey, did you watch the NFL games on Sunday? Did you see number 19? Yeah, Brock Bowers was developed here. But he makes it clear to these young men, he's like, I'm not going to recruit another Brock Bowers. I'm not recruiting you to become a Brock Bowers. I'm recruiting you to be the best version of yourself. And if you do that at a place like the University of Georgia, if I did my job right and I identified your skill set, then you're going to have just as successful of a career as Brock did, which means you're going to maximize your talent. You're going to maximize your skill set. That goes a long way, especially, Kaylee, it can be very easy to recruit tight ends at the University of Georgia. But Todd Hartley, the way he recruits, the way he looks for guys, he makes it seem like he hasn't gotten one great tight end yet.
All right. Well, we do have another tight end that we are going to discuss who recently got an offer. Something different that we're going to do now is we're in that part of the off season where people are just going to start getting offers left and right. We're going to see more commits over time. So when we have that available, we want to do an offer of the week. And this one is the 3-star tight end Zachery Turner out of Duncanville, Texas, somewhere that Georgia has recruited in the past. Recently got an offer. I mean, is this a Todd Hartley type of guy?
So this is a whoa guy, Kaylee. Like me, that I probably watch film. Everybody that Georgia offers, right? Just look right here. I call this guy a 3-play offer. Like you can look at the first 3 plays on his tape. Look at him right there. Catches a short pass, turns on the jets, outruns the defense. Now he is being recruited as a hybrid to Georgia, tight end / wide receiver, because you see true wide receiver skills right here. But this one right here, this one this one play right here, I was like, I've seen enough, but I can't wait to see more. Kaylee, look at this. This is special. This is in Duncanville. Duncanville is a continual Texas State championship type school. Colin Simmons, the great tight end out of the great linebacker at Texas, came out of this. But look at this right here. You want to talk about physicality? You want to talk about putting your hands on a guy? You want to talk about manhandling a guy? And it was this point when I saw that one, I'm like, over. I don't even need to see anymore. But then you keep watching it because you're like, what's this Turner kid going to do next? This is a 3-star wide receiver tight end right now, but watch him. Again, break a tackle, outrun the defense. Kaylee, this guy looks like a tight end with wide receiver speed, and we all know how well that can work at the University of Georgia.
Yeah, because you look at his measurements, 6'2", 215, not necessarily an Elias Williams type, but he does have the skill set of a receiver. Who would you compare him to?
It's a good question. I think he compares to a lot of the guys, like maybe a Javon Wims, but he's had some success at Georgia, but even a little bit faster, maybe like what we wanted to see out of Colby Young this year. He's a guy that's got some size. We saw him just decleat a dude in the run game, but you see him again working downfield, making a play, catching the ball over his safety. But those effort plays we saw earlier at the beginning of his film, Kaylee, these are impressive. And these are impressive in terms of, look at him running away from the whole defense right there, erasing angles. That's why I think the hybrid position there is a pretty good way to look at it right there, because, again, this is a tight end guy right here with wide receiver skills.
So that's going to be our offer of the week. It's the 3-star hybrid Zachery Turner. Now we're going to get into some Mansell's details. Honestly, my favorite part about the national championship and watching it was the hype video at the beginning, and the music was All These Things That I've Done by the Killers. That was my favorite part of watching the entire thing. But the immediate question that comes up in seeing Ohio State win, give them their credit, give them their flowers. They were the best team in college football in the postseason. Nobody can take that away from them. But in them winning, the big question presents itself. Do you have to spend that alleged $20 million to build a national championship roster? In this era of modern college football and NIL and transfer portal, how do you build your roster to get to the point that Ohio State did? Is the $20 million necessary? I mean, what did Ohio State do right? Is it just as simple as you have to spend the money to win the trophy?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff here, Kaylee. Some of the things that stick out to me, nice Killers reference, by the way, was we've seen so many seasons of college football where you may have the best team, but you don't win it all. Like, think how many national championships maybe Mark Richt might have, or even a better example, Bobby Bowden might have had, where, you have a slip up, you hit a banana peel, and then you don't win it all. And I think Ohio State, I guess the main thing I can say is this was a perfect storm for them. And here's where I'll tell you why. They hadn't had success for several seasons. They'd not won the Big Ten. They've lost to their rival Michigan year after year. So you had a lot of 5-star guys, elite All-American types that came to Columbus and didn't do anything. They didn't check off one of the things that they had in their box in terms of their career for Ohio State. So Ohio State successfully got a lot of those guys to come back. I'm talking about those 3rd year, 4th year guys that were eligible to go to the NFL, but kind of like a Tate Ratledge, kind of like a lot of those guys that were at Georgia this year, is that they just didn't accomplish what they wanted to. So they threw enough NIL their way to say, hey, instead of making what you'd make as a 3rd-round pick or a 2nd-round pick, come back to Columbus for one more season and let's see if we can get it done. And again, everybody's going to look at, oh, they paid Will Howard, and they're going to say, oh, they paid Quishon Judkins, a great running back in the SEC. But there were really only like 7 of those guys on the team that they actually 7 to 8 that they brought in via heavy NIL. The rest of those guys were just, I don't want to say this word, Kaylee, but it kind of feels right. They were just thirsty. They were hungry. They were starving for some of the success. And why it was so hard for like a Georgia to replicate is you have a lot of guys that already have 2 rings or 1 ring. And they're like, yeah, it's time to go to the NFL for me. And I've kind of checked off everything I wanted to do in college. So you kind of reached a perfect storm, like I said earlier, where Ohio State, those players came to Columbus to do a great many things, and they hadn't done anything until this year. And really, they hadn't done anything until the last month. That's why I think you just can't sit there and say, give me $22 million and let me build a national champion.
Yeah, that's where my head was at, because immediately after the game, I hadn't had time to let it marinate yet. I was like, well, there you go. That's what shows you that. All of these college football coaches are going to go to their ADs and say, this is what I need to win. And you see it right here. But then the more I started thinking about it, as you said, it was like the perfect storm, because you had the right transfers that made a difference, that weren't a bust. But then you also brought back players who could have gone but stayed. And then you see them exceeding at the high school football level in finding an absolute gem in Jeremiah Smith. So I believe it was all these things. And of course, you have to spend the money to be able to balance that out. But in paying the players that are already there, that already know the culture, already know the coaches, already know the system, that proved to be really beneficial for that group. Obviously, they just won a national championship.
Yeah, and you got to look at it another way, Kaylee. This was probably the most talented team in college football coming into this season. And a lot of people forget that. And you're just like, yeah, they lost to Texas. They lost to Michigan. Excuse me, not lost to Texas, but they lost to Michigan. They lost to Oregon earlier in the year. So everybody was like, well, this team's never going to get it done. It was going to be unfulfilled. But this new second season, you know, there's a lot of folks talking about it right now. A lot of people, not just in the South, but across the country, where it does, in a lot of extents, devalue the regular season. And you know, let's face it, a lot of these young men, they're going to have rings. It's going to end really nice in Columbus for them, but they're not going to end with a Big Ten championship. Kelly, think about this. I think Ohio State tied for 3rd or tied for 4th. I believe it was 4th in the Big Ten this year. They didn't beat Michigan for the last 3 or 4 years, and yet they're national champions. And so that's a very upside down way of looking at your new national champion. You know, they didn't play that extra conference title game as well. So like they had to wait until the very last game of their careers to finally get that ring, any type of ring that they've always wanted to wear.
And you know that Michigan is never going to let them forget it. It's always going to be that little asterisk on the side of 2024, 2025. I don't even know what year it is anymore. National champions. Now let's talk about a question that we really want to know the answer to. I actually spent a lot of time thinking about our question of the week, and I still don't know. There's obviously no right or wrong answers with this one, but I still don't know if I have it. We'll show it to you. This is our question of the week on Before the Hedges. It's name the most likely SEC Media Day picks from next year's team. So they sent 3. There's been a pattern in the past where it's usually some sort of offensive lineman and then the star defensive player. I honestly have no clue.
Well, there's a lot. You got to look at a couple of names. Who's been there for a long time? So you got to remove the transfer portal guys. I would say I think it's going to be way too early for Gunner still. I think you got to look at a guy like Christian Miller, perhaps. C.J. Allen,
number 1 pick.
C.J. Allen, Dalen Everett is another good one. Maybe Micah Morris on the offensive side of the ball, but you look at it, maybe the most likely guy might even be an Oscar Delp. But you sometimes want to have your speaking leaders at the SEC Media Days be some of those guys that are going to garner preseason all SEC buzz. And I think that what makes it so distinctive this year is you have a lot of guys that on this team that last year's team perhaps had 8 or 9 quality guys that could have went to SEC media days. I think this year Georgia's going to have to struggle, or at least think about it, to get to that ideal 3.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. It was a little bit tougher because there just wasn't as many. Christian Miller would be a great pick. Charismatic. His interview with Brandon should go down in history as one of the most iconic things to ever happen on DawgNation. Super charismatic guy. I also thought about CJ Allen and maybe somebody like Dylan Bell.
Yeah.
But
I mean, Lawson Lucky might be a guy you think about.
I think Oscar Delp would be a good one. I didn't think about him.
Yeah, Oscar would be great. Oscar is always very supportive of his teammates. He could tell a lot of Gunner stories, but then maybe it might be somebody like we're not thinking about. I think I always like to look at the offensive line because Georgia's going to rebuild that great wall for next year in its entirety, at least 3 of the 5 starting spots, if not 4. Monroe Freeling, especially if he makes those leaps that he needs to make in his G-Day, spring practice, summer. But I think Monroe didn't really end. Obviously, Mr. Freeling didn't end his second season in Athens on a high note. So I think probably my better choice right there would be a guy like Ernest Green III, a guy that's been around in Athens for a long time, definitely their most versatile lineman coming back. Started a lot of games for Georgia, really cares about being a dog. I think he'd be a good pick.
Well, DawgNation, let us know what you think in the comments and why you're here with us. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, make sure to give this video a like. Now we're going to do our weekly staples, starting with our class breakdown. This is our commits in the 2026 class on offense, the 4-star wide receiver Vance Spafford and the 4-star tight end Lincoln Keys. On the defensive side of the ball, we've got the 3-star defensive lineman, Seven Cloud. He'll be coming from JUCO, and the 4-star cornerback, Jontavius Wyman, who Jeff just wrote about. So check out DawgNation.com to read more on the 4-star cornerback, Jontavius Wyman. Then we'll do our snapshot, 4 commits, currently ranked 14th. These numbers really don't mean all that much just because it is so early in the cycle. I think one thing that stands out to me is the fact that all 4 commits are from 4 different states. It's probably only going to be that way for a little bit longer until they start going after all those in-state kids really heavy. So something fascinating to look at. Then we'll get into our top targets. We have some additional additives this week, including Chauncey Kennon, who we saw on that junior day breakout list. Jeff?
Yeah, he's a guy that I think you look at the ideal DB target right now for Georgia. Might probably be Chauncey. Might be on Georgia's end, might also be on the prospects end. Tight end is going to get really difficult in this class for a lot of reasons, for a lot of the names on this board. You got a Georgia legacy there in Carter Lucky. Nasir McCoy at Buford, he was one of the guys that Jontavius Wyman told me in his wish list for the 2026 class had to have NASCAR McCoy on there as well. So top 26 top targets. We stretched out a couple of names because we had some developments in the middle of this list.
Yep, and you'll see one of those on the next page here. There he is, Carson Alday Baker, along with Jay Lamar. And then you've got the 5-star tight end, wide receiver, another one of those hybrids, Caden Protho, that I have been watching for.
So this guy, obviously, I think Georgia's done a great job recruiting Caden, especially his family. Caden he's a 5-star tight end, or he's rated as a number 2 tight end. But Kaylee, he goes to the Under Armour All-American game week, and he balls out as a top performer, but he only played wide receiver. He currently, Kaylee, right now, he's playing basketball for Bowdoin. He's a 3-time state champion. He's a guy that can put together a 25 and 15-point game on the hardwood at 6'6" plus, 207 pounds. He's also, like I said earlier, a 3-time state champion. And then his dad played college baseball at Jacksonville State. Caden will also be a left-handed hitting DH for the Bowdoin High baseball team. Terrific athlete. If Georgia's in the hybrid business, sign him up, obviously, because Georgia would take him. This rest of this list, Kaylee, gets really interesting. You see a couple running backs here, actually 3 when you think about Derek Cooper. And last year, I want everybody to remember how bad they felt when Usman Kroma flipped to FSU. Everybody called that a loss. Top 100 overall prospect. But I kind of filed it away and I said, yep, stinks right now, stinks for this class, but it's going to make recruiting the top guys in 2026 a lot easier. And that's why you have so many top 2026 targets already at the running back spot.
So for our top 4, they have remained constant in this show. My question to you, Jeff, is there ever a time when Jared Curtis is no longer number 1? Is there anybody else that could be such a priority that they make that jump?
I think the number 1 until all those guys get everything figured out, I think it would be either Jared or Tyler. I still think, Kaylee, I've been saying this on this program for a while. I think the most likely place for Jared Curtis to make his next commitment to, I still think that's the University of Georgia. He set official visits to South Carolina, Oregon, and Georgia right now. He's going to visit Georgia in the middle of June. But I'm going to come back to this right now. This is the Easter egg I was talking about. And I'm going to tell you definitively, Kaylee, I don't think there's any way they sign all 4 of these guys. The reason why I say that, and you could probably even throw Derek Cooper at number 5 in there as well, is I think it's going to cost somewhere around $6 to $7 million annually to sign all 4 or 5 of these guys right there. The going rate right now for a 5-star quarterback looks like an NIL, looks like $3 million per year. You see a lot of these guys all look like they're going to command $1 million plus in the next recruiting cycle as well, especially unless things get really dialed in with the revenue sharing part of it all. But that's why we talked about running backs earlier. It's good to go after Savion Hyder because I do think he's the best running back in the country. And then you've got Derek Cooper there as well, who could play running back or be a great defensive back, be a great star at the University of Georgia. But it's going to take a lot of money in this day and age to sign these guys. And that's why you see Georgia really working hard with a lot of those high 4-star targets in state, because when you're thinking about roster construction, I think that's a smart way to put it all together.
Well, let's move on to just off the list before I get sick at the thought of $3 million being given to someone who can't even vote. All right, let's go to our just off the list here. Add some names to our just off the list as well. This one's going to be part 1. The 4-star defensive end, Kamari Brooks, who was one of the standouts from Junior Day, the 4-star wide receiver, Tavion Brown, also one of the standouts from Junior Day. Then you've got a pair of Georgia boys in Jordan Edmonds, as well as Bubba Frazier.
Yeah, Frazier's a guy. He's the cousins to Thomas Blackshear, who Georgia just signed, that will be a May enrollee. Another big name out of the Junior Day weekend from this past weekend, Kaylee, is Desmond Green. Big interior offensive lineman out of South Carolina. Clemson really likes him. South Carolina really likes him. He really likes Georgia. Georgia really likes him. Kaylee, he's 6'5", about 335 pounds, and he has a 4.4 GPA in all honors classes. Give me all those interior offensive linemen you can ask with a guy like that. Kaylee, he's been to Georgia as much over the past year as maybe some season ticket holders have. So I think Georgia's in a really good spot there with Desmond Green as well.
And then we've got our next page of just off the list, the 4-star safety, Caden Hall out of Milton, Florida. And then you've got the Carrollton guys in Zyke Helton and Ryan Mosley.
Yeah. Graham Houston at Buford. I know a lot of people might see that name and think, is he any relation to Colton Houston? Not really. Basically a family friend. But it was intriguing to see a big offensive lineman coming out of Buford, very interested in the University of Georgia. Graham told me this week that Georgia is right there in his top group, maybe his top 3. Loves the feeling with Coach Searles, loves the feeling with Coach Smart. He's a 3-star interior offensive lineman. We mentioned Ryan Mosley earlier. Very intriguing pitch that Georgia's putting together about being maybe moonlighting a little bit at safety on 3rd down and being a regular full-time wide receiver.
All right, and this is our last page of just off the list, the 4-star defensive lineman, Ernest Rankings out of Decatur, the 4-star safety, Jordan Smith out of Warner Robins, and then there you have it there at the bottom, the 3-star athlete, Zachery Turner out of Duncanville, Texas.
Yeah, I mean, Kaylee, for me, it's one of those things. When I saw that guy's film, I was just like, I had to watch it all. It's something different. It's like, kind of you see those memes on social media where you sit there and you go like, you had my curiosity, but now you have my attention. Zach Turner out of Duncanville, Texas. Really intriguing prospect there. He was still giddy this weekend at the Battle tournament in Miami when he got that offer. And don't sleep on Ernest Rankins, a 6'6", 285-pound DL out of Southwest DeKalb. Kaylee, it's been forever since we can talk about Georgia recruiting somebody out of Southwest DeKalb High School. Everybody knows that's where Quincy Carter came from and a lot of other great players a generation ago. Just off the list, very intriguing. When we look back on this show maybe a year from now, we'll see some future Georgia commitments that came off the just off the list group here.
All right, and that's our final page of just off the list. Before we wrap up, do you have any last piece of intelligence for us?
Well, I think everybody needs to have a Kroger right outside their window, a stone's throw away. And Kaylee tells us it's not even a Matthew Stafford rock heave to get to your Kroger. My family actually learned about Kroger Boost a little bit these past few weeks with snow, because they can get your groceries to you that same day. Instead of fighting for your milk and bread, the Kroger Boost folks can bring it to you that same day, depending on the type of membership you have, or the next day. And one other thing, your first apartment, we've learned on this show, besides all the things about NIL and Ohio State spending money, no first apartment is complete without fairy lights in the background.
And let me just make it clear. It's my first apartment by myself.
Correct.
I have
Duly
lived.
noted.
Yeah, this is my first one. But no, fairy lights are a must. These are not the same ones, but fun fact, I have had fairy lights in every apartment that I've been in. I've just had to order new ones because they get tangled up in the move, but they'll stay there. And so it's a work in progress. And I'm sure if we end up doing more of these, each time you're going to see things will be slowly added in. So also shout out to Mama for helping me move in, because I know that she's watching tonight.
Good job, Mama. Good job.
All right, guys, this has been another episode of Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Jeff Sentell. Also, shout out to Cody and Jay for helping us run this behind the scenes. It's not always easy, and thank you, DawgNation, for tuning in each week to watch. We'll see you right back here next Wednesday at 7 o'clock.
I want the best in life, I never settle.